Moss Landing Marine Labs, Ross Clark, Nature Conservancy, Louis Blumberg, Sea Grant and NOAA Fellows, Nick Sutterpour, Kelsey Ducklow, and Brenna Rudd. So,
Good afternoon, Chair. I'm Lisa Hebner. I'm the mayor of Solana Beach. I'm also on the board of directors of Sandag and the chair of Sandag's Regional Planning Committee. I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for fostering this very important conversation. I'm pleased to tell you, too, that we are involved in some very proactive planning and adaptation efforts in Solana Beach and in the broader San Diego region. I'm here also today to call attention to some of the challenges we face locally and to suggest some options for you to consider going forward. San Diegans have a long history of protecting our air and water, our beautiful natural resources, and our high quality of life. Our region includes 70 miles of coast, which spans 10 cities, the County of San Diego, the Port of San Diego, and several U.S. military bases. Regionally, we've been coordinating on public beach restoration efforts and other coastal issues for more than 3 decades. The new challenges presented by climate change and sea level rise make our coordinated efforts even more important. In light of sea level rise and the reality that upland development has blocked the normal pathway for sand to get to our beaches, a 1993 Sandag Shoreline Preservation Strategy states that San Diego County needs 30 million cubic yards of sand to restore its beaches. We had a 2001 and a 2012 regional beach sand project. They were important, but they were infinitesimal. They're very small, added less than 1/10 of the sand to our beaches than is needed overall. We're fortunate to have local experts at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography helping to provide the latest science to inform our planning efforts. These scientists are forecasting that rising sea levels will magnify extreme high tides and winter storms and will make our shoreline communities and our public beaches more vulnerable to beach loss, coastal cliff erosion, and damage to coastal infrastructure. Local governments are stepping up to this challenge and working both individually and collaboratively to address these potential future changes by conducting vulnerability assessments and then developing scenario-based plans that can be used to tailor local solutions to issues associated with rising sea levels. Note that our regional coastline varies from one jurisdiction to the next. Some will face flooding, while others, like us in Solana Beach, face bluff erosion. So San Diego faces various challenges to properly protect our public beaches, our existing development, coastal lagoons and estuaries, rivers, coastal infrastructure, including a rail line and the Highway 101. The city of Solana Beach has almost 2 miles of coastline and has been identified by local, regional, state, and federal agencies as an area of critical shoreline erosion. Many years ago, the city initiated proactive efforts to combat future sea level rise and stop further losses of the public beach. We adopted our Coastal Commission-approved LCP land use plan in 2013, and I was glad to see Dr. Lester here, and he's showing some pictures of our beautiful city, but our crumbling bluffs. Our LCP outlines the city's long-term shoreline management and sea level rise adaptation strategy, which involves long-term beach restoration efforts, sand, increased coastal setbacks for new development on top of the bluffs, and removal of permanent landscape irrigation for coastal properties. This land use plan took us a really long time to get to because of conflicting interests between blufftop property owners and environmentalists. The fight between seawalls or sand has become very litigious, let's say. In January 2014, we were awarded an LCP planning grant of $120,000 to update a seawall mitigation fee study that we had started in 2010, which includes the incorporation of future sea level rise projections into the fee calculation. These mitigation fees will be used by the city to protect and restore our coastline, basically buying sand, and ensure that our public beaches are maintained in perpetuity. We can also use some of that money for public access. Critically, and for the past almost 15 years, the City of Solana Beach has been working in partnership with state parks and the Army Corps to develop a comprehensive 50-year public beach protection program designed to be resilient to sea level rise over the 50-year life. This is a huge program and very exciting. We just reached a milestone a couple months ago in D.C. Substantial amounts of staff time and city dollars have been invested over many years to advance this project. When implemented, this project will create 35 acres of new public beach, which will serve to buffer the shoreline from direct wave attack from coastal storms and rising sea levels. This public beach will be available for use, of course, by all, including residents and visitors alike. The new beach will protect state park land and key public infrastructure such as Highway 101, beach public parking lots, access ways to the beach, as well as lifeguard stations. This project will also provide quantifiable economic benefits to the cities, to the region, and the state of California by encouraging visitors who are attracted by our beautiful beaches. In the absence of this project, it is estimated that the remainder of the coastline will be fully developed with seawalls. It says over the next 50 years, but the way it's going, we're about 55% now, it seems, right now with seawalls. It's going to go a little sooner than 50 years. Under this scenario, the public will have lost its beaches, and the city and the state will have lost the opportunity to gain critical federal support to restore our shoreline. In addition to the efforts of the city of Solana Beach, the cities of Imperial Beach, who you saw, Del Mar, and Carlsbad, as well as the County of San Diego, have each recently received Coastal Commission LCP planning grants to assess sea level rise vulnerabilities and to begin to identify local adaptation strategies. One of the first multi-jurisdictional collaborative efforts to address sea level rise was a plan for the San Diego Bay. The Port of San Diego, its 5 member cities, and the San Diego Airport Authority worked together on the plan with the support from the San Diego Foundation, a great funder of adaptation plans. While there are many good local adaptation planning and policy development efforts underway in our region, we see some gaps as well as some opportunities to advance adaptation and resiliency planning. These include a need for enhanced regional coordination, increased science-based analysis, innovative adaptation strategies, economic analysis, federal and state collaboration, and stakeholder engagement. And if you allow me to go a little bit into each one of these, I will. It's the responsibility of the state, as we know, to ensure that the beaches and valuable beach amenities and infrastructure are protected, and to ensure the development of a long-term, sustainable, statewide funding program for beach protection and restoration. This could be accomplished through reinvigoration of the public beach restoration program or the development of new additional funding mechanisms. Funds from the Department of Boating and Waterways is what's helped us fund our Army Corps project. We're a small city. Our general fund is only $15 million, so this huge undertaking would not have been possible without the funds from DBW. Regional coordination is important. Not all cities have started the process of assessing vulnerabilities and planning for sea level rise, and not all cities face the same challenges. There's probably not a one-size-fits-all solution, as we know. There is a need for regular coordination and dialogue to ensure we are using the best available models and scientific data as we plan how we will adapt to future rising seas. In our region, SANDAG and the San Diego Regional Climate Collaborative are working on ways to best coordinate our efforts. Science-based data. Our understanding of sea level rise science and models continues to evolve, and we need to have resources to interpret and use the data coming from the experts. This is critical as we implement plans, develop strategies, and monitor, which is important, future changes in sea levels locally and regionally. Innovative adaptation strategies. We are encouraged by the state in its recommendation to support natural or soft adaptation solutions, and we need to understand what that means and what types of innovative solutions can work for our unique individual communities. Economic analysis. We do need a better understanding of the economic risks, costs, and benefits of different strategies to inform decision-making at the local and state level. And finally, but not least, of course, is stakeholder engagement. Working with the community and stakeholders is critical to the success of our adaptation efforts. We need resources to continue long-term stakeholder engagement from plan development through implementation. The bottom line is that the local level is where adaptation happens. We've made progress to date, and the state resources for local coastal planning have been critical to these efforts. We hope to have further support as local governments continue to implement state policy, adapt to sea level rise, and maintain resilient coastal communities for our children and grandchildren. Again, I thank you for inviting me today, and because I have a plane to catch, if you happen to have any questions before going through the whole panel, because I'll have to leave before it's all over, please do ask away.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll move through the panel, though, but
Thank
I
you.
appreciate that, and we know how
And I
to
apologize for having to
get in
leave.
touch. No, thank you all for your patience here. So let's go to Alderman Laird, Humboldt Bay Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Project. Welcome.
Chairman Stone, thank you for inviting us to testify today. My name is Alderman Laird. I'm the environmental planner for the Humboldt Bay Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Project and for the City of Eureka's local coastal program, Sea Level Rise Update. Oops. Thank you. The project began in 2010. It was funded by the Coastal Conservancy's Climate Ready Grant Program. Without that funding, we would never have been able to embark on this adventure. What you're seeing here is the Wiyot Tribe's World Renewal Ceremonial Site during a king tide event, which illustrates 1 foot of sea level rise on Humboldt Bay. This is a ceremonial site that the Wiyots have been using for over 1,000 years, and you can see the level of impact and risk that they're exposed to now. The project involves many agricultural lands around Humboldt Bay. The project components involved conducting a shoreline inventory and vulnerability assessment, developing tidal inundation models and mapping, looking at regional assets at risk, and developing adaptation strategies. The primary proponents in the project are the two co-lead agencies, Humboldt County Public Works Department and the Humboldt Bay Harbor and Recreation Conservation District are the two that led the planning effort. The primary goal and purpose of the project is really to create a regional collaboration effort amongst all of the stakeholders so that we have unified and consistent strategies being developed within the landscape and not being based on jurisdictional peculiarities. Here's the planning working group that we had. It's been meeting over the last 2 years. It includes local, state, and federal, tribal, as well as other resource agencies. Pacific Gas and Electric has been a component, as has Caltrans and the Coastal Commission. And the primary work that we've been involved with is either vulnerability assessment or adaptation planning. The vulnerability that we experience is in the near term is shoreline failure and breaching that would inundate upwards of 9,000 acres of former tidelands. And in the mid and the long term, we're facing tidal inundation with rising sea levels. We looked at assets that are at risk and tried to determine in a regional context what type of adaptation strategies would be suitable for those individual assets and how to go about pursuing those. Here's an example of what we're talking about, of shoreline breaching that has occurred. Again, another king tide illustrating 1.5 feet of sea level rise on the bay. Doing our shoreline assessment and vulnerability work raised a number of issues that we hope to share with the committee. One is such a basic thing as just basic units. The planning documents and planning agencies involved with sea level rise are using English units, 1 foot of sea level rise by 2050, 3 feet by 2100. Yet when you go to get inundation modeling done by engineers and science, they use metrics, and they do the models in half-meter intervals. And we're trying to combine, 1 foot of sea level rise by 2030 with a half-meter modeling. So it would be nice if there was a statewide standard on how we're going to express sea level rise vulnerability. That would be of great assistance. The other vulnerability we're exposed to is tidal inundation, and this brings up the planning concept that we feel is crucial to sea level rise being addressed on tidal environments such as ours. And it's planning at the hydrologic unit. We can't do planning based on jurisdiction or property ownership. We really need to look at individual hydrologic units and the pathways or modes for tidal inundation, and that's what we're doing on Humboldt Bay. Looking at a historical context of the bay, what it was like in 1870, it was about 60% open water and 40% marsh with a 60-mile shoreline. Today we have 102 miles of shoreline. We actually have more artificial shoreline than was there originally. 75% of the bay is artificial. This is crucial in that the 77 miles of artificial shoreline need to be maintained, otherwise they will not function, which is holding back the tides from inundating the lands behind it. And the dominant structure we found on Humboldt Bay are earthen dikes that were built over 100 years ago. Unfortunately, the historical legacy that we inherited is no central dike district for the maintenance and management of those dikes. It's left to individual property owners, and that's created a tremendous amount of problems on the bay. We conducted a vulnerability rating of the shoreline and found that 26 miles of the artificial shoreline is essentially vulnerable to being overtopped or breached between now and 2050. And so it gave us sort of a magnitude and distribution of the problem on the bay. In looking at sea level rise, we are in probably one of the most active tectonic areas in California, north of Cape Mendocino. And so other than regional sea level rises that the National Research Council issued in their 2012 report, we're looking at rates of subsidence, and that's compounded. We have the highest rate of sea level change probably on the West Coast because of the subsidence component. And looking at what has been projected by 2030, we're looking at 1 foot of sea level rise for a tidal datum of, that we use as our baseline, which is our mean monthly maximum tide. We also looked at our average king tide on every sea level rise scenario. And at the planning horizon of 2050, we were looking at 2 feet, and 2100 as high as 5 feet. I think what's important here is we had to decide, are we going to use the projected rate or are we going to use the high projection in our modeling and in our assessment work? We chose to use the high. And again, in going back to the units, it's hard to model 1 foot of sea level rise. Fortunately, the king tide, average king tide is 1 foot higher than our tidal base, and our engineers modeled that. So we have a model and mapping database to show what 1 foot of sea level rise will be. And by 2050, it's 2 feet of sea level rise is equivalent almost to half a meter. So again, we have that. Had we not had that inundation modeling data, the 2030 planning horizon really wouldn't be very meaningful to us because we would have no data to illustrate what was at risk in the 2030 horizon. It's such a short time frame. Most of the projects that are built have a longer life than through 2030, and most of the general plan cycles will take us beyond 2030 now. So we originally thought of eliminating the 2030 planning horizon, but because we have the data, which many areas probably don't have that type of site-specific tidal inundation data, we selected to use the 2030 to illustrate just what's at risk in the immediate future. The planning work that we've been doing over the last 2 years and the completion of the vulnerability assessment has been made available to all the LCP authorities on Humboldt Bay, and starting with Eureka, who received a grant from the Ocean Protection Council. Both the City of Arcata and Humboldt County have also received grants to update their LCPs, all based on the vulnerability assessment and the regional assets at risk studies that we've done. They're taking that work and now moving forward in developing adaptation policies and strategies. Here's an area in Eureka that is at risk now between now and 2030. It illustrates the low-lying former tidelands that were diked in this area here. One of the things that we came across in looking at our regional assets at risk is while we're looking at diked agricultural lands, really the critical and the priority assets are the 101 transportation corridor. PG&E's gas lines traverse that area. We have a local regional airport. We have municipal transmission lines that are underground. So we have a number of utilities that utilize the shoreline protection devices of agricultural lands, but yet they're not involved with the shoreline protection. This illustrates a disconnect between assets and benefits from shoreline protection that we think leads to a need to have partnerships among asset owners and asset beneficiaries. In 2030 to 2050, our inundation modeling shows a little bit of surface inundation, but what this doesn't illustrate, but the issue that we're addressing in the City of Eureka is that our most critical asset is our wastewater sewer system. It's the underground assets that are at risk first. While we don't see surface tidal inundation, the underground tidal inundation will precede what we see on the surface. And infiltration into sewer lines and infiltration into sewer lift stations will overpower the capacity of the wastewater treatment facility, even though it may be at a higher ground. And so we're realizing it's our underground utilities that are the first line of defense that we need to consider, not necessarily the surface assets. None of these surface assets can function if the underground assets, such as sewer or water, are no longer operable. One of the things that this led us to in understanding in our preparation of the LCP update for Eureka is that Eureka only owns 3 of the critical assets that the city depends on: the wastewater system, the municipal water system, and the stormwater system. But the gas and the electrical system, the communications system, the fuel terminal, all of those are privately owned by other entities that the city really has no control over their assets or how they're going to address sea level rise. So we realized that again, that public-private partnership is going to be something that's important. This is what the vulnerability area looks at 2100. We're going to have significant impacts on waterfront, marine transport infrastructure, as well as the underground utilities along the waterfront, surface streets, and a tremendous number of businesses that will need to be relocated. The resources for the City of Eureka to be able to address these, or the capacity to be able to address these without state funding is non-existent for them to approach it. A basic planning strategy that we realize, at least in our environment, is that we have to plan and manage on hydrologic units. We can't do it by jurisdiction. We're a property owner. Here's a case where we have several hydrologic units. The Fay Slough unit happens to be protecting Highway 101 and airport, PG&E's gas lines. That's a much more higher priority subunit for us to look at adaptation strategies for than some of the other subunits. All of the property owners in that subunit are dependent on the property owners on the shoreline from maintaining their shoreline to maintain their uses. So again, we're looking at our regional approach based on how the water flows on the landscape and not by jurisdiction. And so in dealing with the LCP update and reaching out to the public, really our Humboldt Bay planning effort, we didn't receive funding to do public outreach. We ended up having annual public workshops on where we all volunteered to put those together. But at the LCP level, we're really trying to reach out to the public and the property owners, the ones that really need to be understanding what's at risk. And it really comes down to explaining how is sea level rise going to impact them, where is it going to impact, when is it going to impact, what it is going to impact, and who's really going to address it. These basic elements need to be in our stakeholder and public education function of the LCP. But I'm not sure that the LCP is the best forum for doing that. I think that this is something that should be funded in and out of itself, as much as vulnerability assessment and adaptation planning is really the educational component. And so on Humboldt Bay, our most vulnerable lands are these former tide lands that have been diked. They are agricultural lands, which is significant in the coast. They're also important wildlife areas for Aleutian geese, which were recently delisted. But more importantly, it's across all of these lands is where we've laid our underground utilities, we've put our transportation systems, and it's those shoreline protections that are protecting these century-old dike agricultural lands that are really needing to partner with the utilities and the transportation entities to protect these lands and to keep them in this condition as long as it's sustainable. PG&E on Humboldt Bay has significant gas distribution and electrical distribution, has a power plant. We even have nuclear materials that are stored. And this, again, illustrates another point that we ran into in the nuts and bolts of doing LCP updates is that we weren't able to get a GIS data file from PG&E to locate their gas lines or their electrical distribution powers. We weren't able to get the communication companies to show us where the optical fibers were. We ultimately went to the Homeland Security Administration, and the city of Eureka had to register with them, go through security checks, and then they would show us the maps where the gas lines were and the optical fibers, although they wouldn't allow us access to the GIS files. So through screen capture, we were able to get the images, do our own digitizing, and now have that element. And it's just, it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to, maybe the state as an umbrella can have access to that information, then provide it to the local LCP authorities. But really, knowing where the gas lines are and when are they going to be vulnerable is crucial to the city and the bay and being able to do its work. So working with Highway 101, which is a critical regional asset, at least in District 1, Caltrans has been excellent to work with. They've been a partner in our adaptation planning effort from the outset. But again, this is not a private asset, but a public asset. But at the state level, the city in its LCP work has very little influence on Caltrans' management of this highway, even though it traverses through the city. And all the communities on Humboldt Bay are dependent on how is Caltrans going to react to its vulnerability as it traverses these low-lying areas. So ultimately, there's some recommendations that we would like to make to the committee and hope that you would consider. It would be nice to establish as a minimum planning scale, at least on dike lands on the coast, that hydrologic units be the planning level that we work with, not jurisdictional boundaries. And we really need state funding for local sea level rise planning and adaptation projects. If the state doesn't fund this, it's just not going to happen. The cities don't have the resources, nor do the counties, to do the planning, let alone fund projects. They're not able to fund their own infrastructure and capital improvement projects to the level they would like. So state funding is critical. Underground utilities are really our priority assets in this public versus private ownership of these utilities. requires us to form partnerships so that we can work together. And although we don't have that capacity as LCP authorities, we really need to be able to team up and partner with these people to plan for sea level rise. So forming the public-private partnership, whether it's for funding or just for planning and implementation purposes. And the last point that I want to make is that we're approaching adaptation planning on a regional context. When we get around to the point of implementing adaptation projects, we need to think about regulatory authorization on a regional context and not project by project. On Humboldt Bay, all the 41 miles of dikes, the way that we would maintain or enhance those dikes are all going to use the same type of adaptation activities. We could have a regional programmatic permit that all of those activities would be covered under, rather than having each individual property owner submit for an individual permit. So regulatory authorization on a regional context for these adaptation measures is really going to facilitate implementation of this stuff, or I think it's really going to break down in the private sector when it comes to the permitting and the regulatory, even if we develop the strategies and promote the projects. So. And that, I think, our project is online. The Humboldt Bay Harbor District is one of our co-lead agencies. And we've made all of our GIS data files available for download, all of our project reports, all of our meeting PowerPoint presentations, all of the things we've produced over the last 4 years are available online for the public and the private to access. So with that, I would like to thank the committee for having us share our experience with you.
Great, thank you. You've done quite a bit of work.
Thank you.
Up there. We appreciate that. All right, Mr. Clark, Moss Landing Marine Lab.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Ross Clark, and I'm the director of Central Coast Wetlands Group at Moss Landing Marine Labs, and also one of the primary partners on the Monterey Bay's efforts to address sea level rise along the coastline. As has been said before, the work I'm going to present is a collaborative effort among many partners. Many of us were self-defined, organically met and identified the need to do this type of sea level rise planning. Next slide. Oh, here it is right here. Thank you. So, we were fortunate enough to had partners that developed some of the sea level rise models for the Monterey Bay, funded by the Coastal Conservancy and helped to be organized by the Nature Conservancy. These models were completed about a year ago and depict sea level rise impacts along our coastline in our low-lying areas for the entire Monterey Bay. And this is an example of one of the outputs of that work. The work that I'm now going to present has just begun, and it's been funded by the Ocean Protection Council, and it's being supported by both Santa Cruz and Monterey counties. And the idea behind our current work is to take these data outputs and put them into context of local planning and management. You showed this to a city's public works director, and they really do not know how to respond, nor did we. So we needed to really investigate what was behind these models and how could local jurisdictions actually respond to them through adaptation planning. Those maps that I just showed depict many different types of coastal impacts overlaid on top of each other. And the first effort that we've been working on is to disassociate those and identify the specific coastal processes that are occurring within each section of the coast. And here are some of the examples of the types of coastal impact that require different adaptation strategies, including cliff erosion, dune erosion, rising tides, inundation of king tides increasing with sea level rise, and then, of course, increases in flooding associated with larger storms in the future.